Have you ever noticed how often the experts get it wrong? Every election season, pundits speak with absolute confidence. This candidate will win. The race is over. The data is clear. And yet, history is littered with shock upsets. 2016, Brexit, the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Take the 2008 financial crisis. The world's top economists and banking executives sat in glass towers, convinced their models had conquered risk. They had equations, graphs, and Nobel Prize-winning theories that claimed housing prices could not collapse nationwide. That was the bet, a mathematical impossibility, they said. Then, reality struck. The markets crumbled, entire financial institutions vaporized overnight, and those same experts scrambled to explain how their perfect models had failed. Prediction is supposed to be a science, yet too often it feels like fortune-telling dressed up in numbers. We trust charts, models, and data, but what if the very way we think about the future is flawed? Nate Silver's The Signal and the Noise pulls back the curtain on why so many predictions fail, not because we lack information, but because we drown in it. Like a sailor lost at sea, desperately scanning the horizon, we mistake distant mirages for islands, noise for signal, certainty for truth. Here's the problem. Most people don't forecast the future. They declare it. They latch on to a single outcome, ignoring uncertainty, probabilities, and the lessons of history. But the world doesn't work that way. The best predictions, the ones that actually work, aren't absolute. They're fluid. They evolve. They embrace uncertainty. The best forecasters don't see the future as a straight path. They see it as a series of shifting probabilities, a landscape of possibilities where the ground is never quite solid. The problem? We hate probabilities. No one wants to hear that there's a 70% chance of a storm. They just want to know if it's going to rain. That's because as human, we crave certainty. It's wired into us, an ancient survival instinct. The brain hates ambiguity, so it fills in the gaps, fabricating certainty where none exists. But here's the thing. Certainty is an illusion, a carefully constructed mirage built on selective data, overconfidence, and too often, wishful thinking. And if you want to predict accurately, you need to unlearn what you thought you knew about prediction. Because the future isn't a prophecy, it's a puzzle. And the pieces, they're hidden in plain sight. And those who fail to do that, they aren't forecasters. They're just storytellers, spinning narratives that sound convincing until the real world shatters them. The future doesn't care about our confidence. It doesn't care how certain we feel. The only question is, are we willing to see reality for what it is? Imagine standing in a crowded room, trying to hear a single voice in a sea of overlapping conversations. Words blur, meaning gets lost, and what's important drowns beneath the noise. That's exactly what happens when we try to predict the future. We mistake randomness for patterns, distractions for insights, noise for signal. In the modern world, we are drowning in data. Every day, billions of data points are generated. Financial reports, social media trends, scientific studies, political polls. But here's the catch. Most of it is useless. Take the stock market. If you watch financial news, you'll see analysts dissecting every single fluctuation. The market is up because of job reports. The market is down because of interest rate fears. They weave a story after the fact, making it seem obvious. Yet the next day, the market moves unpredictably, and they scramble to come up with a new explanation. The truth? Most of those daily fluctuations are just noise, short-term randomness that has no real predictive power. The same happens in politics. Pollsters track voter sentiment daily, obsessing over every small shift. A candidate's approval rating drops by 2 cents. Is it a sign of a larger trend? Or just noise? Most experts dismissed the signals that suggested a Trump victory. They relied on headlines, conventional wisdom, and flawed polling instead of digging deeper into the data. The result? A global shockwave. So how do the best forecasters cut through the chaos? They focus on long-term patterns, not moments. They know that more data isn't always better. It's often just more distracting. They ask, is this truly a signal or just random fluctuation? Take weather forecasting. Meteorologists don't panic over every gust of wind. They filter out irrelevant data and focus on key variables, atmospheric pressure, ocean currents, storm paths, allowing them to predict hurricanes with incredible accuracy. Compare that to earthquake predictions, where scientists struggle because there's too much noise and no clear pattern to follow. This is why big data by itself is dangerous. Without the right filters, more information just means more ways to fool ourselves. The world isn't a neatly written story where every event has a clear cause and effect. Sometimes things just happen. And if you can't separate the real signals from the noise, you're not forecasting, you're just guessing with more data to justify it. The key to better predictions isn't more information, it's knowing what to ignore. Imagine you're a doctor. A patient walks in with a headache. Could be a migraine. Could be stress. Could be, worst case scenario, a brain tumor. Do you immediately assume the worst? Or do you update your assessment as you gather more evidence? This is how Bayesian thinking works. It's not about making a single absolute prediction. It's about constantly updating your beliefs as new information comes in. The world's best forecasters, from meteorologists to high-stakes poker players, don't make fixed predictions. They think in probabilities. But here's the problem. Most people don't. Take the 2016 US presidential election. Most pollsters insisted Hillary Clinton had a 90% plus chance of winning. But Nate Silver? He put Trump's chances much higher. Not because he thought Trump would win, but because he understood how uncertainty works. A 30% chance isn't zero. It means 3 times out of 10, that scenario happens. The mistake most people make is locking in their beliefs too early. They think once they've formed a conclusion, the job is done. But Bayesian reasoning tells us the opposite. Our initial belief is just a starting point. Every new piece of data should either strengthen or weaken our confidence. Here's how it works. Start with a baseline belief. Based on prior knowledge, what's the probability of something happening? Incorporate new evidence. Does the new data confirm or contradict what you thought? Adjust your belief accordingly, not in extremes, but in small, calculated shifts. Now let's apply this to something practical, weather forecasting. If a meteorologist sees early storm signals, they don't just say a hurricane is coming for sure. They start with a probability, say 20%. Then, as new satellite images and pressure readings come in, they adjust that probability. Maybe it jumps to 50%. A day later, 80%. They don't commit too early. They let the data guide the forecast. But most predictions don't work this way. Instead, we see fixed mindsets, investors who refuse to admit when a stock is failing, politicians who cling to old strategies despite new realities, doctors who misdiagnose because they don't revise their assumptions. The key lesson? Be flexible. Update your beliefs. Adapt. The future isn't set in stone. It's a shifting probability. And those who understand this don't just make better forecasts, they make better decisions. If there's one thing history proves over and over again, it's this. The people who sound the most confident are often the most wrong. Overconfidence has brought down empires, crashed financial markets, and sunk billion-dollar businesses. It's not just a flaw, it's a blindfold that makes people underestimate risk, ignore warning signs, and believe they're smarter than they really are. Take long-term capital management, LTCM, a hedge fund run by the world's brightest financial minds, including Nobel Prize-winning economists. They built models so precise, so mathematically perfect, that they believed they had eliminated risk itself. Their models told them their trading strategy was unbeatable. The numbers were absolute. Then in 1998, reality struck. The Russian financial crisis hit, an event their models had deemed almost impossible. Markets moved in ways they hadn't accounted for, and in less than 2 months, LTCM lost $4.6 billion. The firm collapsed, nearly taking the global economy with it. The lesson? Overconfidence blinds us to uncertainty. It's not just finance. Look at Silicon Valley's tech predictions. In 2007, Steve Ballmer, CEO of Microsoft, laughed off the iPhone, confidently stating, "There's no chance it will get any significant market share." Today, the iPhone dominates the smartphone industry. Or take the 2008 financial crisis. Banks were convinced that housing prices would never fall nationwide. Ratings agencies assigned A scores to mortgage-backed securities filled with toxic debt. No one questioned the models until the models collapsed and the global economy imploded. So why do people fall into this trap? Because certainty feels good. People crave absolute answers, not probabilities. They want to believe that the future is predictable, that their models are airtight, that their instincts are infallible. But here's the truth. The world is complex, uncertain, and unpredictable. The best forecasters, the ones who consistently outperform the so-called experts, aren't the ones who claim to know the future. They're the ones who constantly question themselves, update their beliefs, and accept uncertainty. Humility isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. Because in a world where confidence sells, it's the cautious thinkers, the skeptical analysts, the ones who embrace doubt who actually see reality as it is. And when the next big crisis comes, because it always does, who would you rather bet on? The one who sounds certain, or the one who's ready for anything? We live in an age of data worship. Every industry, from finance to medicine to marketing, is obsessed with data-driven decisions. The numbers don't lie, they say. But here's the shocking truth. Sometimes they do. Big data is powerful, but it's also dangerous when misunderstood. More data doesn't always mean better predictions. Sometimes it just means more noise, more false patterns, and more ways to fool ourselves. Let's start with a classic example, Google flu trends. In 2008, Google made a bold claim. They could predict flu outbreaks faster than the CDC, simply by analyzing search data. It sounded like magic. Millions of people searching for flu symptoms or fever medicine could reveal real-time flu trends. At first it worked, but then things fell apart. Google's model overestimated flu cases by nearly 140% in 2013. Why? Because it was drowning in noise. Seasonal search trends, media hype, and even people Googling symptoms out of curiosity were mistaken for real flu outbreaks. The algorithm wasn't tracking the flu, it was tracking internet behavior, and the two weren't the same. This is a common trap in big data, false correlations. Consider this. Between 2000 and 2009, the per capita consumption of mozzarella cheese perfectly correlated with the number of civil engineering doctorates awarded in the US. That's right, cheese sales and PhDs moved in sync. Does this mean eating more mozzarella makes you a better engineer? Obviously not. It's a statistical accident, random noise that looks like a meaningful pattern. And yet these kinds of misleading correlations are everywhere in business, finance, and even science. Big data also fuels overconfidence. When companies or analysts have more numbers, they assume they have better answers. But unless the data is filtered, analyzed correctly, and placed in the right context, it can lead to terrible decisions. Take the 2008 financial crisis. Banks had insane amounts of data on mortgage-backed securities. Their risk models ran billions of calculations, analyzing every possible scenario, except the one where the entire housing market collapsed. They had the data. They just didn't see the real risk. So what's the lesson here? Data is a tool, not an answer. It's not about how much data you have. It's about knowing what to ignore. Because in the end, the biggest danger of big data isn't the numbers themselves. It's the illusion that the numbers alone can predict the future. Most people want certainty. They want a yes or no, black or white, win or lose answer. But the real world doesn't work that way. The best forecasters, whether they're predicting elections, financial markets, or the weather, don't think in absolutes. They think in probabilities. Consider the way we talk about the weather. If a forecast says there's a 70% chance of rain, what does that actually mean? Most people interpret it as, it's going to rain. But a better way to think about it is, out of 10 days with the same conditions, it will rain on about 7 of them. That's a probability, not a guarantee. Now imagine if we applied this thinking everywhere. Let's take poker. The world's top poker players don't win because they can see the future. They win because they think in probabilities. They calculate the odds of winning a hand, factor in their opponent's behaviors, and make decisions based on expected outcomes, not emotions. A weak hand isn't an automatic loss. A strong hand isn't an automatic win. It's all about the odds. But here's the problem. Most people don't think this way. Take elections. In 2016, when Nate Silver's model gave Donald Trump a 30% chance of winning, the media laughed. They assumed 30% meant unlikely, when in reality, a 30% probability means that if you ran the election 10 times, Trump would win 3 of them. That's not impossible. That's significant. And yet, people saw the number and dismissed it, because they weren't thinking in probabilities. They were thinking in certainties. This is why so many financial analysts, business leaders, and everyday people make terrible decisions. They want definitive answers where none exist. They ignore uncertainty. They don't ask, what are the odds? But thinking in probabilities isn't just for gamblers and statisticians, it's for everyone. It's how investors decide when to buy or sell. It's how military strategists plan for war. It's how venture capitalists bet on startups. The future isn't a single path, it's a range of possible outcomes. The goal isn't to predict the exact future, it's to understand the likelihood of different futures and act accordingly. Because in a world where certainty is an illusion, the smartest move is to always play the odds.